The air in our family jewelry workshop always smelled of metal dust and hope, or at least it used to. Now, it was mostly just metal dust and a faint scent of despair, clinging to the heavy velvet curtains and the worn wooden benches where generations of my family had crafted their dreams into gold and silver. For me, Alara, the scent was always a reminder of my inadequacy, a constant whisper of not good enough in the symphony of hammering and polishing that defined our lives. I was the youngest of three, the afterthought in a lineage of artisans. My elder siblings, Damien and Serafina, were gilded in talent, their hands seemingly born to sculpt metal and coax brilliance from gemstones. Damien, the heir apparent, was a prodigy with gold, his designs bold and innovative, yet rooted in the classical techniques our family revered. Serafina, with her ethereal grace, was the gem whisperer, able to discern the soul of a stone, setting it in ways that amplified its inner fire. And then there was me, Ilara, clumsy Ilara, uninspired Ilara, worthless Ilara, as my father's silences often implied. My role in the family business, the House of Dubois, was nebulous. I swept floors, polished finished pieces, tasks deemed too menial for my gifted siblings, too important to entrust to outsiders. I was the dust bunny of our gilded cage, flitting around the edges, unseen, unheard, and certainly unappreciated. My father, Jean Pierre Dubois, a man sculpted from granite and tradition, rarely looked at me directly. When he did, his gaze was like a jeweler's loupe, scrutinizing, finding flaws I already knew existed. Ilera, he'd say, his voice a low rumble that echoed the workshop's heavy machinery. Precision is the soul of our craft. Observe Damien, Serafina. Learn. Learn what? To be them? To be born with hands that danced with metal instead of fumbling with it? Damien, ever the dutiful elder brother, tried to include me. He'd show me his sketches, intricate blueprints of necklaces and tiaras, explaining the engineering behind each curve and flourish. I'd nod, feigning understanding, my mind a blank canvas in the face of his genius. Serafina, in her rare moments of sisterly affection, would let me hold her prized gemstones, sapphires the color of twilight, rubies that pulsed like hearts, emeralds that held the green secrets of ancient forests. Feel their energy, Alara, she'd whisper, placing a cool stone in my palm. Each one has a story. I'd feel nothing, just cold, hard rock. The truth was, I was adrift in a sea of talent I couldn't navigate. My attempts at design were laughable, clumsy sketches that looked like a child's scribbles compared to Damien's masterpieces. My settings were precarious, stones wobbling in their mounts, a constant source of my father's thinly veiled disappointment. Ilera, he'd sigh, shaking his head. Perhaps the front office is more your forte. The front office. Filing invoices, answering phones, the Siberia of the House of Dubois. Even my failures were deemed unworthy of his full attention, relegated to a quiet, dismissive sigh. And yet I loved the workshop. I loved the rhythmic clang of the hammers, the soft whir of the polishing wheels, the way the light caught the facets of 1,000 gemstones, turning the room into a glittering cave. I loved the stories whispered in hushed tones between the artisans, tales of legendary jewels, of royal commissions, of love and loss intertwined with precious metals. I absorbed it all, even if I couldn't contribute in the way they expected. Unbeknownst to my family, while I swept floors and filed invoices, I was also learning. Not the way they wanted, not with hammer and torch, but with my eyes and ears, and most importantly, with my mind. I devoured books on gemology, not just the romantic lore Serafina favored, but the hard science, the refractive indices, the Mohs hardness scale, the subtle inclusions that told a stone's history. I haunted the workshop library, a dusty room filled with forgotten catalogs and journals, tracing the evolution of jewelry design through the decades, the centuries. I noticed trends, patterns, shifts in consumer tastes that seemed to escape my family. So deeply entrenched were they in their traditional ways. The House of Dubois, once a beacon of Parisian elegance, was starting to dim. Our clientele, once loyal and affluent, were dwindling. Younger generations, with their fast fashion and digital marketplaces, were not drawn to our classic, somewhat staid designs. Sales were declining, whispers of financial strain began to circulate among the artisans, and the air in the workshop, once filled with hope, grew heavy with anxiety. My father, in his granite stoicism, doubled down on tradition. Quality endures, Ilara, he'd pronounce, polishing a silver cufflink with unnecessary vigor. Trends are fleeting. We must remain true to our heritage. Damien and Serafina, equally steeped in our family's legacy, nodded in agreement, their designs becoming even more ornate, more out of touch. I saw it happening, the slow, inexorable decline. It was like watching a ship, magnificent but old, sailing directly into a storm, its captain refusing to change course. And I, the insignificant dust bunny, saw the storm brewing on the horizon. One evening, after a particularly tense family dinner where the dwindling sales figures were discussed in hushed, worried tones, I couldn't stay silent any longer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet despair of the room. Papa, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. All eyes turned to me, surprised, perhaps even annoyed, that I dared to interrupt their somber ritual. Yes, Alara. My father's tone was flat, devoid of expectation. I I have some ideas, I stammered, my carefully rehearsed words suddenly feeling flimsy and inadequate. Damien chuckled softly, a sound that felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. Serafina raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression a masterpiece of polite disdain. Ideas, Ilara? Damien repeated, his voice laced with amusement. About what, darling? Sweeping more efficiently? The laughter rippled through the room, a light, dismissive sound that stung more than any harsh word. My cheeks burned, but I pressed on, fueled by a desperate urgency. About the business, I said, my voice gaining a tremor of strength. About, about attracting new clients. My father sighed, a long-suffering sound that deflated my fragile courage. Ilara, with all due respect, business strategy is not your area of expertise. Perhaps you should leave such matters to those who understand them. But Papa, I pleaded, I've been studying. I've been reading the market reports, the fashion magazines. Things are changing. Our designs, they're not what younger people are looking for anymore. Young people, Serafina scoffed. Are we to pander to fleeting trends, Alara? Sacrifice our artistry for the whims of fashion? It's not pandering, Serafina, I argued, my voice rising slightly. It's evolving. We can honor our heritage, but also adapt. We can use lighter metals, simpler settings, incorporate gemstones that are trendy but still beautiful, still high quality. I dared to pull out a small, worn notebook from my pocket, its pages filled with my messy handwriting and even messier sketches. Look, I said, flipping it open, my fingers trembling. I've been researching morganite, aquamarine, tourmaline. They're beautiful, they're popular, they're less expensive than diamonds and rubies. We could create a new line, something younger, more accessible while still maintaining our craftsmanship. Silence descended, heavy and thick as the metal dust in the air. My family stared at me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and something else. Perhaps a flicker of curiosity, quickly extinguished by ingrained skepticism. My father took the notebook, his granite face unreadable. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning my clumsy sketches, my market analyses, my hesitant suggestions. The silence stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, he closed the notebook with a snap, handing it back to me. Ilara, he said, his voice still flat, but now laced with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Your enthusiasm is commendable, but the House of Dubois has a legacy to uphold. We do not chase trends. We create timeless pieces. That was the end of the discussion. My ideas were politely, firmly, utterly dismissed. I retreated back into my dust bunny existence, my heart heavy with disappointment. but a tiny ember of defiance still flickering within me. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't stand by and watch our family business, our legacy crumble because of stubborn pride and outdated traditions. So I started to act, secretly, cautiously, like a whisper in the wind. Using my meager savings, I purchased a small selection of morganite and aquamarine gemstones. During my lunch breaks, hidden away in the dusty library, I started experimenting. I taught myself basic wire wrapping techniques from old books, practicing with copper wire and inexpensive beads until my fingers, once clumsy, started to develop a hesitant dexterity. I created a few simple pieces: delicate necklaces with single morganite pendants, earrings with aquamarine drops, designs that were light, modern, and subtly elegant, a world away from the heavy, ornate style of the House of Dubois. I kept them hidden, tucked away in a small velvet pouch, my secret rebellious creations. One Saturday, a young woman, a tourist, wandered into our workshop, drawn by the elegant facade. She browsed the display cases, her expression growing increasingly disappointed. "It's all very beautiful," she said politely to Serafina, who was attending to her. "But I was hoping for something a little lighter, perhaps. Something for everyday wear." Serafina, ever the gracious saleswoman, steered her towards our collection of diamond studs. "Timeless elegance," she purred. The young woman smiled politely, but her eyes still held a hint of longing for something else. As she turned to leave, I, in a moment of impulsive audacity, stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Perhaps, perhaps I can help." Serafina shot me a look of pure, unadulterated horror. My father, who was overseeing Damien's work nearby, frowned, his granite face hardening. Ignoring their silent disapproval, I pulled out my velvet pouch and carefully unwrapped one of my morganite necklaces. The soft pink stone caught the light, its delicate hue surprisingly vibrant against the muted tones of the workshop. The young woman's eyes widened. "Oh," she breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the pendant. "This is beautiful. Is this Dubois?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "It's a new design," I stammered. Um, limited edition." A blatant lie, but desperation makes liars of us all. She tried on the necklace. Her reflection in the antique mirror suddenly softened, illuminated by the gentle glow of the morganite. A smile bloomed on her face, a genuine, delighted smile that reached her eyes. "I love it," she said. "I'll take it." Serafina, recovered from her initial shock, quickly stepped in, smoothly handling the sale. My father, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on me, a storm brewing behind his granite facade. That single sale, that small spark of validation, ignited a fire in me. It was a tiny victory, a whisper of hope in the echoing halls of doubt. I continued to create my secret designs, using my lunch breaks and evenings fueled by a desperate need to prove myself not just to my family, but to myself. Word of our declining sales reached a fever pitch. Artisans were being let go, corners were being cut, and the once vibrant workshop was shrouded in a palpable gloom. My father, his granite composure finally cracking, called an emergency family meeting. The atmosphere in the meeting room was thick with despair. Damien and Serafina offered solutions rooted in tradition: cost-cutting measures, a return to even more classic designs, strategies that felt like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Finally, my father turned to me, his gaze weary, devoid of even disappointment now, just a hollow resignation. "Alara," he said, his voice barely audible, "do you have anything to add? Or are you content to watch our legacy crumble into dust?" This was it, my moment of truth. My heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear, but a surge of adrenaline, of purpose. I stood up, taller than I'd ever felt in that room, and placed my worn notebook on the mahogany table. "Papa," I said, my voice clear and steady, surprising even myself. "I do have ideas, ideas that might actually save us." Silence. Then Damien's scoff. "Alara's ideas? Are we really resorting to this?" "Let her speak, Damien," Serafina said, her voice surprisingly neutral. Perhaps even she, in her elegant denial, was starting to grasp the gravity of our situation. I opened the notebook, my hands no longer trembling, and began to speak. I spoke of market trends, of changing consumer preferences, of the rising popularity of colored gemstones, of the need for lighter, more versatile designs. I presented my sketches, my market analyses, my carefully researched proposals for a new collection, a collection that would honor our heritage but also embrace the future. I spoke for what felt like hours, pouring out my heart, my knowledge, my desperate hope into the silent room. My family listened, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to something else. Intrigue? Desperation? Perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of reluctant hope. When I finished, the silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a silence of contemplation, of consideration, not dismissal. My father picked up my notebook again, his eyes scanning the pages, not with scrutiny, but with interest. Finally, he looked up, his granite face still unyielding, but his eyes, softer, less condemning. Ilara, he said, his voice low, but now carrying a weight of something other than disappointment. These, these are bold ideas. Desperate times, Papa, I replied, meeting his gaze, my own voice firm. Desperate times call for bold measures. The debate that followed was long and arduous, tradition clashing with necessity, pride battling pragmatism. Damien and Serafina voiced their concerns, their skepticism, their ingrained resistance to change. But the stark reality of our dwindling finances, coupled with the undeniable logic of my proposals, slowly, grudgingly began to sway them. Finally, my father, the patriarch, the embodiment of Dubois tradition, made a decision. We will try it, he declared, his voice still gruff, but carrying a hint of something akin to hope. We will try Alara's experiment. It was a reluctant endorsement, a grudging concession, but it was enough. It was a crack in the granite wall of tradition, a sliver of light in the encroaching darkness. The following months were a whirlwind of frantic activity. I was thrust into a role I had never imagined, leading the design and production of the new collection. My siblings, still skeptical but now cautiously cooperative, lent their expertise. Damien, grudgingly, helped refine my designs, his technical brilliance adding a layer of sophistication I couldn't have achieved alone. Serafina, surprisingly, embraced the colored gemstones, her gem whisperer's touch bringing out the subtle beauty of morganite and aquamarine. I worked day and night, fueled by adrenaline and a fierce determination to succeed. I sourced new materials, streamlined production processes, even ventured into the daunting world of online marketing, something my family had always dismissed as beneath our dignity. Slowly, painstakingly, things started to change. The new collection, Éclat Léger, Light Radiance, was launched with a hesitant fanfare. Initially, sales were slow, frustratingly so. Doubt crept back in, whispering insidious voices of failure. My family's skepticism resurfaced, their I told you so glances becoming more frequent. But then, something shifted. A fashion blogger, a young influencer with a massive online following, stumbled upon our collection, drawn by the delicate beauty of a morganite pendant. She featured it in her blog, in her social media posts, praising its modern elegance, its accessible price point, its unexpected Dubois craftsmanship. The effect was instantaneous, electrifying. Orders started trickling in, then flowing, then surging. Our online store, once a digital ghost town, came alive with clicks and purchases. Younger clients, drawn by the buzz, started venturing into our workshop, their eyes widening in surprise at the unexpected modernity of Éclat Léger nestled amongst our classic designs. The workshop, once shrouded in gloom, buzzed with renewed energy. Artisans were rehired, new apprentices were taken on, and the rhythmic clang of hammers, the soft whir of polishing wheels was once again a symphony of hope, not despair. And my father? His granite face slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to soften. His gaze when he looked at me was no longer scrutinizing, but thoughtful. He started asking me questions, not dismissive critiques, but genuine inquiries about market trends, about design strategies, about my ideas. One evening, after a particularly successful day of sales, he called me into his office, a room I had always entered with trepidation. He gestured for me to sit, a gesture so rare it made my heart skip a beat. Alara, he began, his voice still gruff, but now warmer, softer than I had ever heard it. The Eclat Léger collection, it is successful. A wave of relief, of validation washed over me, so profound it almost brought me to my knees. Yes, Papa, I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. It is. He paused, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph on his desk, a portrait of my grandparents, the founders of the House of Dubois. Tradition is important, Alara, he said, his voice low, almost to himself. But tradition must also breathe. It must adapt to survive. He turned back to me, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw not disappointment, not dismissal, but respect. You saw the storm coming, Alara, he said, and you steered the ship away from it. He stood up, walked around his massive mahogany desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of affection so rare, so unexpected it made me gasp. I I was wrong about you, Alara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I I misjudged your worth. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions, with years of silent misjudgment. Now finally acknowledged, finally forgiven. It wasn't an apology, not in so many words, but it was more profound, more meaningful than any apology could ever be. In that moment, standing in my father's office, the scent of metal dust and hope once again filling the air, I realized I had finally found my place in the House of Dubois. I was no Damien, no Seraphina. I wasn't a prodigy with hammer and torch, nor a whisperer of gemstones. But I was a Lara, the dust bunny who had seen the storm, the worthless daughter who had saved the ship. And in saving our legacy, I had finally, truly found my own worth. The gilded cage had become my kingdom, and the gemstone heart, once hidden and unappreciated, now shone with its own quiet, resilient radiance.